Oh, almost. All right. You guys hear me? Great. Now, my name's Kai. Thank you, Christiana, for the introduction. Thanks a lot to Creative Mornings. I'm a first-timer, so I've never been here, and I've never done this. One thing I think is quite important is we seem to be on a rooftop here, gathered as a collective, in a space that we probably normally would not occupy. It's sort of like I don't know, a sort of little bit of a collective, an island that gets to occupy different spaces in the city and experience this beautiful morning. So it seems to be an amazing idea. Thanks a lot to the musicians. It's beautiful, and thanks for the coffee. So I hope I can talk a little bit about things that are related to architecture. Obviously, I'm an architect, but I thought also it'd be a good challenge. I think as architects, we have a sort of liability and a responsibility to be able to approach the other design disciplines at large and be able to engage a larger collective. So the way I wanted to talk about the lecture was, it's basically 4 parts. The first part is going to be a little bit of architectural history, so sorry if that's boring. The second part is going to be about Snøhetta as a practice, so the way we run our practice. There's been, I guess we could say that I think we're in an interesting moment in architecture, and perhaps design is a little bit ahead of us, where we've been seeing a sort of the discipline of architecture being pushed by what we normally call star-architects like Zaha Hadid or Frank Gehry, these sort of names, and we don't normally see the practice of architecture as run in a sort of collective, which I guess you could say Snøhetta in a way represents. So I think it's quite important to talk about the practice before really talking about the projects. So that's part 3. I'm going to go through, let's say, some of our newest projects that Snøhetta is doing. I think probably a lot of you know about the Opera House. I'm going to try to show you like the 50 projects that we're doing after the Opera House. So hopefully people, because it's like a lot of stuff when we're sort of, we're in many different countries. I think right now we're completing 15 buildings as we speak. So I think it's interesting to sort of show what that means globally. I think it's a bit interesting for a Nordic practice like Snøhetta to be participating in that sort of collective. And then the fourth, if we have time, I'm going to talk about some beehives. So hopefully that works. Oh yeah, as I understand, we're using some new technology today, and I hope it works for everyone. So this is the first slide.
Does everyone have access to the URL?
So this is the first slide. Is that the second slide? Does it say minimal is? Third slide, an ideal. Yeah? Okay, great. You know, it's interesting. When I was studying architecture, one of my sort of most favorite professors said, you know, it was sort of, why is this thing standing up? And I said, well, you know, it's supposed to stand up. And he said, no, you should have built it until it fell down, because then we would know how far you could push it. So I think as sort of architects and designers, we have to always be sort of critically pushing things, innovation, technology, to see how far we can push it, almost to sort of the brink of complete failure. So I think this swipe.2 is a good sort of moment in trying to push what a presentation can be. Normally you're sort of up here with these slides and sort of a big projector and stuff, and now everybody can either be checking their email or listening to what I'm saying or viewing the slides. So. Okay, so I thought the topic was interesting that Creative Mornings Global, I guess, sent out, is this idea of minimal. And I think within the design disciplines today, we often talk about this thing of minimal or minimalism, and one of the problems I think we have with it is often talked about as sort of an applied style, sort of an aesthetic. If you say minimal, you understand, you know, maybe sort of sleek glass and white and these sorts of things. And one thing that we often forget is what is sort of the content of minimal? What would an idea behind minimal be? What would an architectural idea behind minimal be? So I was thinking, if we rather look at minimal as a style, can we look at minimal as something like an ideal, like a set of ideal, like a value set? So if we say that minimal is an ideal of architecture, what could that mean? Well, this is part 1, so this is the architectural history part. So when I was thinking about minimalism, this building here, this is called the Seagram building. It's one of the great masterpieces of the last century. It's by Mies van der Rohe. It's in New York. And basically, it's sort of, I guess, it's a glass skyscraper in many ways. It was one of the first buildings to sort of embody what I guess we could begin to reference as a minimal style. It has sort of glass, steel, stone, these sort of sleek things. But it also does, it sort of envisions the content of what was going on in the sort of post-war Western world. It was looking at values like transparency, values like democracy, values like a collective. So not only does it exist as a building in the sort of context of New York, what it also does, if you look at the slide, is it's creating an open, public, completely accessible space at the ground level. That's actually stepping back from the city context of New York. So this sort of open public square in front of the building was actually not only the sort of, let's say, the style of its time, but the style was actively pushing the content of what was going on in that time. And I think a lot of the value systems that we've been building up since that time, not only through design, but also through its content, is sort of where we're at architecture today when we talk about something like minimal. So again, like, it was basically opening up what would normally be a sort of corporate, private lobby space and opening that completely transparently to the public. So when we look at something like the Oslo Opera House today, I think we can look at that as an evolution or a translation of many of these ideals. We have a sort of building that I guess you could say was earlier related to something of culture of high art, to ballet, to opera, that wasn't visually or sort of through its content understood as a public building. And by the extension of this public space, I'm sure many of you have been there and sort of walked around on the roof and all those things. What that is, it's not only, let's say, it could be minimalist in its materiality, but it's also minimalist in the ideals and the content it's translating. By that it's publicly accessible. On the next slide you can see, I think this is Justin Bieber concert or something. Or no, this is actually the premiere of the opera of Carmen. So while everybody inside are paying for tickets to watch the premiere of Carmen, the people on the roof are doing the same thing for free. So it's an important sort of translation of some of the similar ideas, and we're talking about like 70, 60, 80 years of sort of a progression of values, of a value system. So if we try to step away again from this idea of minimal as a style, can we talk about minimal as an ideal of things like sustainability? Like, can we talk about a minimal footprint of democracy? Can we talk about like a collective, how we work together, how design embodies the values of a collective? And we can talk about this idea of plurality. So how do we exist? How do we sort of engage a large group of people? Collective culture, this is when I talk about the practice of Snøhetta. As I spoke earlier, I mean, I'm not the principal of Snøhetta, I'm not the director, I'm not the founder. I work there, but I'm allowed to sort of stand here and talk to you guys about it. And that's, I guess, normally in sort of the power relationships that one understands, especially when something like an architecture office, that doesn't happen. I don't know, there's been things in the media and whatever, and all these things they say you can't tell a Snøhetta what they are not or supposed to do or can do or whatever. And so I think this sort of, I guess that sort of moment in architecture where we don't identify Snøhetta behind a person, but we identify Snøhetta behind a group of people, also behind its buildings, behind its clients, behind its contractors, behind its public engagement, is quite important. This is where we are. We're here in Oslo, just on the, you can actually see the office right from here. So on the other side of the fjord that isn't sort of redeveloped, but the fjord that's still kind of shitty, which I think is great because it's sort of one of the last free public spaces left in Oslo. There's people just like fishing there and doing whatever, God knows what. But it's sort of one of those last spaces. I hope you can come over and see the office sometime. We're in an old warehouse right down by the fjord. In New York, we're sort of connected by the Atlantic Ocean, if nothing else, and our office is right down in Wall Street. So if you sort of take the ferry over from Dumbo, you're almost right there. This is us in our office. This is us every Monday morning where we do a large public, or not public, but for the entire office meeting where everybody tells everybody what's going on. We're like 100 people in Oslo and 50 or so in New York. And this is us. Every year we go up to Snøhetta, the mountain that the office is named after, and we do something called Dovre Conversations. So this is us, everybody from New York, we all hike up the mountain and we spend 2 days on the mountain talking about what we should be. So this is us. Again, this was this year, so it was it's quite interesting. You see people from like coming from the city in New York and they're like trying to go up Norwegian mountains in jeans when they can do it, you know, so you see Norwegians, they get kind of extreme about their winter clothing, but you know, you can also just get up there in a pair of jeans. So anyways, this is us again. And this is the office space. So it's an old sort of warehouse building down by the fjord. We pretty much just gutted the space and furnished it a bit. What's important is that we have no single offices. So directors, partners, and interns basically sit on the same floor, regardless of project or position or seniority. Everyone sits on the same floor, and you're also distributed quite randomly. This is sort of a project meeting where we sort of from the initial stages of a project looked at the sort of content of what we're producing and how we can find a sort of common set of values to work with. And that involves not only the client, the contractor, hopefully politicians, whoever is in the decision-making process, so you're immediately able to start discussing collectively what it is we're working on. This is another workshop, so this is sort of getting physical, going in, drawing, building things, very important to the process. And these are the four most important spaces of the office. On the top left, you see the sort of tables that function as our drawing and meeting tables during the day, and at lunch, they're cleared off, and that's where we eat lunch. And then they continue as sort of meeting tables and stuff for the rest of the evening. At the top right is the coffee machine, obviously super important. The bottom left is this sort of atrium space where everybody gets to meet. And on the bottom right is the robot that is right now milling a model. So it's building a 3D model of a building. And so that's actually the thing that's doing all the work. This is, last year we did a Christmas party, and we also do these every year. So this is one continuous banquet table in sort of the same space. It's also important that we're not only working in this space, but we're also living in this space. People do children's birthday parties, all these things, but it's sort of the idea of embodying a collective. This is an installation that we have in our office. It's bags of water. It was from a party we had, and it was so popular that they kept it up. But we try to do parties, I think, twice a year. Sometimes we do public lectures and things as well. And sometimes these things stay up. And these are the guys reaching the peak of Snøhetta. I think some of these guys for the first time. So singular in the plural, what does that mean? It means that as an individual, and let's say as society becomes increasingly focused on the individual, we have to understand the individual in the context of the plural, in the context of a collective. And how can we exist not only sort of through our own talents and through our own abilities and our own education and our own experiences, but how can those values and how can those experiences be translated into a larger collective? This is, I guess you could say, this is sort of a diagram of how the office works. And this is a diagram of how offices, especially architecture offices, are typically organized. So you can see sort of groups of colors that are related to a specific project, and then there's sort of in the middle here, there's a project manager who's sort of shuffling between 2 or 3 different projects. And then you have people in each project group only talking to each other and sitting next to each other. This is what a project looks in our office. We're not allowed to sit next to people working on the same project, so you have to use the entire space. And hopefully, if you look at these sort of wavy lines, they're not like straight lines. They're basically like detours, like you going and talking to other people and them messing up your design by giving you bad or good ideas. And this is what it would look like maybe with 2 or 3 projects. So you have these sort of strangely connected lines, and this is maybe what the entire office looks like in a normal day. So we're not sort of, let's say, position related to a specific task. We're looking at how you can organize an office so that 100 people can work on like 50 buildings at the same time, but at the same time that those buildings can influence each other and that there's a base of common knowledge that's continually being output. Okay, so this is the third part of the lecture where I talk a little bit about the projects. I hope we have a little bit of time left too. I think I've been up here begging for all my time. But anyways, so how can a minimal value, a set of values be translated in something? And I think one of the ideas behind minimal is we're talking about being holistic. And being holistic is also about being able to communicate and work through one idea. So it's not necessarily about refusing the sort of complexity of a project today, but it's really about being able to look at a project holistically and being able to understand that through one idea that then can be translated into all the sort of separate oppositions and things that exist in a project. So this is something that we did recently in Hong Kong. This is for it's called Museum Plus. It's probably one of the most important museum buildings that is being constructed right now. Unfortunately, we didn't win this, by the way. But what we're looking at is how we could understand the typology of a museum. So how could we completely change the way a museum was working by giving it a completely public space between the museum and the city. So basically, if you look at this image, the black thing that you can't see is the museum. The white thing that you see on top is the roof on top of the museum, and the spaces between is where you walk when you're going from the city to the park. So basically what you're doing is you're going between the city and the park. You don't even know you're going through an art museum, but you're sort of walking through it, and you're gradually being acclimated to the culture of the museum. So maybe you'll go to the park the first time, the second time, and then you'll begin to look at what's under you. And then gradually, maybe on your third or fourth time, you'll understand you're on top of your museum, and your sort of ownership of that space will be sort of acclimated, and then you'll maybe enter the museum and enjoy art. It's interesting, when working with the project, the museum director said that the sort of crowd of people that go to art museums today, we have those, the sort of people that fly around and know what they want to see and know what specific pieces of art they want to see. The largest problem museums have today is how to engage the public. The largest sort of amount of people that museums want to engage are the people that normally don't go to a museum. So this is the way we looked at it, was how to actually do that through architecture. So this is that sort of space in between the roof and the ground that is framing the view of Hong Kong Island on the other side. The second project, again, looking at sort of one idea, it was a gallery space. We were asked to make a gallery for one piece of art, so it's a single painting, and they wanted to frame that thing in the landscape. So all it is, in this case, it's a very simple, I guess you could almost say minimalist, box with a glass facade with one piece of art. This project is quite interesting. It's in Sweden. It's basically a particle accelerator. I don't know if you guys know that. I'm sure you do. It's basically a thing that just spins really fast and figures out how the universe works. Basically, the way that thing works is that it cannot be harmed by the rest of the world. So the frequencies and the vibrations and everything from around the particle accelerator cannot basically be touched. So what we did is we started mapping, working with mathematicians and these kind of guys, is what those frequencies are and how to negate those frequencies. So if you see these sort of this mogul-like landscape around the building, this is a sort of GPS mapped out mogul system where the guys with the bulldozers are driving around following their GPS and building these moguls that then negate the exact frequencies that the building cannot receive. So the one idea was actually something not really related to anything you're experienced with an architect, is we have these frequencies in this particle accelerator and we don't want to blow the planet up. So this is the thing under construction this winter, and it's going to be finished this fall. Minimal footprint, what does that mean? I mean, we have this sort of idea of sustainability that floats around, and most of the time it's a really strange idea that doesn't really relate to design. And I think one thing that concerns me a lot is often we find it as some sort of applied technology to a problem where we're looking at it from sort of, let's say, the way we used to before we even thought about sustainability. So you get this sort of, often you see you're doing the same bad building and then you put solar panels on top of it, and you sort of understand that as solving a problem. And I think what we need to be doing when we're thinking about things like sustainability is really going back to looking at exactly what the problem is and looking at that entire idea holistically. So one of the things we're working on, especially in Norway, is what we call the powerhouse. What powerhouse is it's buildings that not only are zero energy, they produce energy. So their sort of net gain or their net worth to the power net is plus. This is the first project. It's in Trondheim, and it's basically this really weird looking whale shape with a hole in it, but it's doing all these amazing things related to solar power, but it's also creating a really nice space to work in. It's a sustainable office space where people want to work. This is Powerhouse Kjørbo that just opened 2 months ago. It's the most sustainable office building in Europe. It's amazing. The people that worked on it can talk about in sort of incredibly intricate detail of how it works. But what's important about it, it doesn't only work as sort of a piece of engineering. It's a really beautiful and very comfortable space to inhabit. So it's looking at sustainability not only through how we're producing power and how does water work and how do you recycle toilets and all the toilet water and all these things, but it's looking at how is the space actually comfortable to inhabit as well. And so this is the facade, which maybe doesn't look like this sort of minimally aesthetic thing. I mean, what the facade is it's wood that's been burnt and through burning the wood, like the natural protection of the wood sort of kicks in, and this facade is basically completely maintenance free. This is a bench project we're working on in Guadalajara, where we sort of had the resources to design the benches and then not anything else really. It's sort of a pro bono project, but then what we did was we involved local artists in Guadalajara to basically decorate their own benches. So you're inviting the public to participate in that dialogue, in the creation of that content. So here we have local artists laying this really beautiful tiling on these benches that then are sort of placed in the city. Basically, they could be dropped right here, and they'd sort of act as public spaces, free spaces. Minimal material, contemporary technology. I think one of the things that designers should be looking at, I was talking about technology earlier, but also is this sort of understanding that the sort of progress of the world of sort of material technology and computers and all of these things. I mean, we've been is to look at these things as tools that help us push these sort of this progressive content into the world. So this is the Opera House curtain. It acts as the sort of sound buffer that you need to create everything that needed in the opera house. It's also incredibly beautiful, and it's completely two-dimensional. It looks like this sort of amazing 3D thing. It's done in collaboration with artist Pei White. When you look at it, when you zoom in, it's just a two-dimensional photograph that's then sort of silk printed onto the fabric. This is a sort of band stage for a for a festival. You can see it's a completely temporary structure, so you deflate it and inflate it once a year, and it's just one single material. It's incredibly sort of cheap to build and maintain. You basically figure out how to keep it how to keep its tensile strength, and then you inflate it, and then you suspend it. And so it's inflated every year, and it works not only to house a sort of shelter for the band, it also projects the sound backwards into the city behind it. So if you're not lucky enough to have a ticket to participate in the concert, you can also stand behind the thing and get the sound and actually clearer than you would if you had a ticket. This is the reindeer pavilion that is up. Actually, it's the thing that I showed earlier. It's looking over the view of the snow at the mountains, so it's sort of our spot. Well, it's a publicly open space, but it's our spot to be able to look over our mountain where we go every year. And it's used throughout the year. It's completely public. It's open. What we did here was we used some pretty sophisticated 3D technology to basically model this sort of very fluid interior that then was translated to the shipbuilders on the west coast of Norway that took these wood elements. I don't think this video is going to work. No, it's not going to work. But basically they took these wood elements and milled them with the same robot technology that we're using in the office. We were able to export the same 3D model we were working on with the robots directly to their fabrication software on the west coast, and then they were able to ship these directly on site on the mountain and build them up. So this is the space, and this is the pavilion in the context of the mountain, and here it is. Bjarne Melgaard. This is a project we've been working on. It's called A House to Die In. It's sort of an eccentric project, but it's been a lot of fun to see it evolve. What it started on is sort of Bjarne's sketches. He's sort of interested in these panthers and other things, and beginning to translate them into a physical model through a 3D plot. Looking at these sketches and translating them into a building, into a 3D model. And then working on that and sort of gradually processing his sketches and our designs back and forth in a sort of continuous 2D to 3D process. Also working on the facade panels. This is our robot in the office building the facade. So these are laminated oak panels that then are milled with a robot, and then as a facade treatment we burn them again. Burning wood turns out to be a really good facade treatment. We had the original oak panels in the office, and then we had the burnt panels over winter outside, and the ones that were outside, the burnt panels outside in the winter survived perfectly, whereas the unburnt panels look terrible. They're all cracked. And so anyways, this is the guys in the office working on prototyping these panels. This is our director on the left with the torch. These are the panels. And these are the things being built in the office in one-to-one. So this is a one-to-one, let's say, mock-up of the house that is going through planning approval now up here in Oslo, up in Ekeli. And this is the house, or the sort of mock-up of the house being placed in a gallery in London for an art show by Bjarne. So we have some neighbors that don't understand why a house to die in is a good neighbor, but we think it is. And here it is in a sort of conceptual model. SF MoMA, working on the expansion of the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. Again, just really quickly, what we're doing right now is we're working on these really sort of sophisticated GRP panels that are sort of slumped within this warehouse hall and then worked on as a one-to-one mock-up. So these things are being placed on the facade as we speak, and I think it's going to be really nice. Enhancement of place. This is a building we did, a museum for Petter Dass. It was looking at this mountain and then putting a hole in the mountain. So if you can see here, this sort of big crack is a diamond wire cutter that was cutting a slice out of the mountain. And this is the building replaced back in that slice. So sort of looking at what is a place and how do you insert a building into a place, but also how can you enhance a sort of a beautiful place through architecture. A sort of new translation of that idea is a cave center we're working in Lascaux that actually just started on site. It's sort of the same idea, looking at how to occupy an existing landscape. So this is basically a place with 4,000-year-old cave paintings that's being replicated through a 3D process. And what we're looking at is basically trying to very carefully open up that mountain side, just sort of almost like taking a piece of paper and slicing in the middle and barely lifting it up, but looking at how we can sort of naturally and gracefully occupy that space. So this is a 3D model of what the cave paintings are going to look like. It's basically a 3D replica of paintings that get destroyed by humans when you walk in them because we sweat and all these things. So we have to do an exact one-to-one perfect 3D replica of the entire cave. It's really interesting. A generosity. We're working on Times Square. So it's basically the repaving and the redesign of entire Times Square. It's a space that used to be, I mean, I'm sure you've been there. It's complete chaos. What we're looking at is making the entire thing completely public, repaving everything. This is a rendering of what it's going to look like. And we started getting the prototype benches on the site. And so this is the prototype on site. And so this like very New York looking guy standing on the bench is hopefully a sort of proof that this thing might work. We're also working on mass transportation, public transportation. This is a public transportation in Mecca that's replacing something like 90,000 buses for the Mecca pilgrimage. It's quite interesting when we're looking at how to not make this sort of enclosed system where we're talking about people that maybe have never even seen a subway before and how to make that a very transparent, very inviting experience. We have, at a certain point during the Hajj, the Mecca is probably the most international place on the planet. So looking at how to do that, we're working on metro stations in Riyadh as well, same idea. How to not make this sort of big hole in the ground as a concealed metro network, but we're making this very lush sort of oasis garden between two lines of the subway in the ground with this big, amazing mirrored bowl on top that reflects the context of the city. When you sort of go through the metro, you can look up and you see where you are. And when you're in the city and you're sort of running to get to your train, you look in the mirror and you can see that your train just left and you're like, oh shit. We're working on the Busan Opera House. It's quite interesting. It's sort of like the sister to the Oslo Opera House. The Oslo Opera House is a little bit sort of, you know, I don't know, a little bit rough and sort of masculine with these sharp lines. The Busan Opera House is sort of like the little sister, actually the big sister because it's twice as big. But looking at more sort of these feminine curves, and it's sort of hopefully an evolution of the ideas that were being worked on 14 years ago to something that's actually we're starting to work on now. And so this is the inside of that opera house chamber. Okay, part 4, beehives. We don't only work on these sort of huge international, large-scale, huge budget projects. This is something that we actually really enjoyed doing. It's something that's quite sort of ad hoc, almost. But what's interesting is that the guys over at Mathallen at Vulkan, they wanted to make these beehives for something like 200,000 bees. Bees seem to be amazing for urban development and all these things. So these weird sort of alien pod things are going to be the home of several 100,000 bees So these were done completely in-house in our workshop at the office, and they're being installed today. So I think the opening is tomorrow. So if you guys are interested in bees, you should go check it out. And so this is our guy Carson simulating a bee for scale. Because I was standing around trying to take a picture of this thing yesterday and there were no bees. So that's what hopefully it will look like. Thanks a lot, guys.